The Walt Disney Company are closing in on complete ownership of Disneyland Paris, and we'll discuss the ramifications of this up next. Hi Waltoneers, I'm Jack. This is DSNY Newscast. Go ahead and subscribe down below if you haven't already, so therefore you never miss one of these DSNY news updates. And now let's get to the headlines, and that is that many of you may be unaware of this, but the Walt Disney Company do not own Disneyland Paris. This is the same as any non-US domestic Disney resort, such as Shanghai Disneyland, which opened last year in June, where the Chinese government actually own 57% of the resort and Disney only own 43%. Anyways, the reason why Disney do not fully own Disneyland Paris dates way back to 1985, which was the very beginning of the Michael Eisner era. Now, back in 1985, when Disney were looking for locations within Europe before settling on France to build Disneyland Paris, the French government at the time demanded that the Walt Disney Company had official European roots within France and must be registered with the European Stock Exchange. This meant that when Disneyland Paris, which used to be called Euro Disney, first opened in 1992, the Walt Disney Company wasn't a majority shareholder in the venture. Instead, they were only allowed to own 49% of the share of the resort, and the French government would own the other 51%. And don't get me wrong, Disney at the time were happy to oblige to this agreement, as they didn't want this risky new business venture to take down the heart of the Walt Disney Company and all of the different resorts in Disneyland and Walt Disney World if Disneyland Paris wasn't a success. However, these foundations plague the whole situation between the Walt Disney Company and Disneyland Paris right to today. As when Euro Disney opened back on April 12th of 1992, it was meant to have a budget of only $1 billion. But by the time it opened, it had overrun its budget to $5 billion, and we're talking 1990s money and not modern US dollars, which essentially meant that from day one of Disneyland Paris opening, it was operating at a loss and had already accumulated $4 billion worth of debt. Now, other factors did play into this, such as a recession across Europe and the rest of the world, interest rates doubling, high unemployment in France, and also the fact that Disney realistically built the park in the wrong part of Europe. And that's because Michael Eisner had a soft spot for France and Paris, so he built the park there instead of where it should have been built over in Spain. But all of this added to the financial woes of Euro Disney SCA. So measures were taken immediately, with the cancellation of royalty fees for a 2-year period, a postponement of a 3-year period of paying back the interest on the $3 billion worth of loans, and also the main issue, that is, a consortium of 60 banks decided to sell off the 51% share that the French government owned of Disneyland Paris to individual shareholders. Out of all of this, Saudi Arabian Prince Alawid bought up 14% of the shares, making him the second largest shareholder, right behind Disney in the Disneyland Paris entity. Over the years, Prince Alawid has granted additional funding and financially supported the resort. In return, though, he has decided which characters that he wished to see within the parks, as he has paid the royalty fees to bring them over to Disneyland Paris. That's why you see rarely seen characters from Disney parks in the US pop up in Disneyland Paris, such as characters from Treasure Planet and Big Hero 6 being used at Disneyland Paris before they are used at Disneyland and Walt Disney World. However, the debt crisis has continued to put a stranglehold on the potential of Disneyland Resort Paris, seeing limited expansion, lack of refurbishment and diminished investment. But despite all of this, throughout the years, Disney have made attempts to reduce the debt burden on the resort. Now, we can get into how the debt's risen and fallen over the years, but that really doesn't matter, as Disneyland Paris is essentially still in debt to the tune of billions of dollars. But recently, Disney CEO Bob Iger has said that enough is enough and he now wants to see Disneyland Paris under the Walt Disney Company's ownership. And now, with a new president of the resort itself, Catherine Powell, the future of Disneyland Paris looks exceedingly bright. Major refurbishments have been undertaken in the last 18 months, huge overhauls of classic attractions, and general resort renovation has taken place in what has been called the enhancement plan. However, Disney have only recently bought the remaining 10% of shares from Prince Aloid, bringing their total from 76% to 86% ownership of Disneyland Paris, closing in on the magic number of 95%, as at 95%, the Walt Disney Company becomes the sole owner of Disneyland Paris, which means that they can then revoke membership from the European Stock Exchange and fold Euro Disney SCA into the Walt Disney Company and bring much more investment and expansion and renovation and every other great thing that they can provide to the Disneyland Paris resort. So what's next for Disneyland Paris? Well, as Disney have already done over at Hong Kong Disneyland, Disney have already announced their intentions to build Marvel attractions at Disneyland Paris in the coming 10 years. More than likely, it will be in the Walt Disney Studios Park, replacing the struggling attractions such as Armageddon, Studio Tram Tour, and more than likely Rock and Roller Coaster. And we'll maybe even see Tower of Terror become Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, as the Tower of Terror in Disney California Adventure and the one at Walt Disney Studios Park in Disneyland Paris are identical ride and attraction buildings. So these are some extremely exciting times for Disneyland Paris fans and Disney fans in general, as Disney are seemingly returning to what they do best, and that is creating magical, immersive experiences. And that's it for today, guys. Go ahead and comment down below. As you, the Waltoneers, I would like to know what you think about Disneyland Paris and the upcoming refurbishments and renovations and expansions coming to the park, and whether you'd want to see a Marvel land, or whether you'd actually want to see any other kind of IP or different lands you'd want to see coming to Disneyland Paris. And I've been Jack, you've been you, and I'll see you real soon.